What began as a routine wellness session has now exploded into one of the most shocking royal revelations in recent memory. Camilla's own personal trainer, a man trusted inside the palace walls, has broken his silence. And what he claims he was instructed to do involving Princess Catherine is so strange, so calculated, that even seasoned royal insiders are stunned. This wasn't fitness advice. It was something else entirely. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The confession did not come wrapped in fanfare or dramatic theatrics. It came quietly, almost reluctantly, during what was meant to be a routine media appearance about health and discipline. Yet within minutes, the tone shifted. The trainer's voice tightened. His phrasing became careful, deliberate. He described moments inside palace walls where conversations drifted away from stretching routines and strength training, and toward something far more delicate: Princess Catherine. That single name, spoken repeatedly, instantly transformed a personal testimony into a potential royal crisis. According to him, the shift began subtly. A casual question here, a passing comparison there. Camilla allegedly wanted to know how Catherine maintained her stamina during long public engagements, how she carried herself during hours of scrutiny, how she managed to appear composed under relentless global attention. At first, it sounded like admiration disguised as curiosity. But admiration does not usually require detailed observation logs or strategic breakdowns. And that is where the situation began to feel intentional. He claims the requests evolved. Beyond guiding fitness routines, he was allegedly asked to analyze posture, endurance, even the psychological presence Catherine projected during appearances. Not publicly, not openly, privately. The trainer described feeling a creeping awareness that he was being drawn into something that extended beyond health. These were not innocent questions asked in passing. They were structured, repeated, focused, almost tactical in tone. Inside the palace, the reaction to his remarks was reportedly immediate. Doors that were once open became guarded. Calls were made. Meetings were convened. Because what he implied struck at the core of royal stability, the fragile equilibrium between influence and hierarchy. If these instructions were real, they suggested not insecurity alone, but strategy. And strategy inside a monarchy carries consequences. What makes the confession more unsettling is the emotional undercurrent he hinted at. He described moments of hesitation, as if he himself struggled to understand why Catherine's name surfaced so often. He insisted there was no open hostility, no dramatic confrontation, just a persistent focus, a curiosity that lingered longer than it should have, a fixation that felt purposeful rather than spontaneous. Princess Catherine, by all accounts, remained unaware. While she continued fulfilling her duties with quiet confidence, discussions about her physical presentation were allegedly unfolding elsewhere. That contrast: one woman performing her role unaware, another allegedly dissecting it behind closed doors, adds a chilling layer to the narrative. Because power struggles within the monarchy are rarely loud, they are subtle, calculated, measured in influence rather than argument. The trainer's visible hesitation during his statement has only intensified speculation. He did not appear vengeful. He did not seem triumphant. If anything, he looked conflicted. Like a man who understood that speaking out might alter more than his own future. His tone suggested fear not of scandal, but of what silence might mean. And that nuance has left royal watchers asking a single burning question: why now? As the story spreads, one reality becomes undeniable. This is not about yoga mats or fitness schedules. It is about perception, about hierarchy, about the invisible battle for relevance in an institution built on tradition and rank. And if even a fraction of these claims hold weight, they reveal a monarchy navigating pressures far more personal than protocol would ever admit. But to understand why these instructions sent shockwaves through the monarchy, we must first examine the delicate balance of power that already existed between Camilla and Princess Catherine. For years, the public saw unity, coordinated appearances, polished smiles. But behind the grandeur of royal events, insiders whispered of tension, subtle glances, strategic positioning, carefully chosen words. The relationship between Camilla and Princess Catherine was never openly hostile, yet it was never effortless either. And now, the trainer's claims suggest that something far more calculated was unfolding beneath the surface. To the outside world, it looked seamless. Two senior royal women standing shoulder to shoulder, fulfilling duties with composure. Yet beneath that composure lived an undeniable contrast. Catherine's rise had been swift, almost organic. Her popularity did not feel manufactured. It felt earned, effortless, global. Crowds gravitated toward her. Headlines favored her. Social media amplified her. She represented continuity, youth, and a sense of future promise that resonated far beyond palace walls. Camilla's path, however, had never been simple. Her legacy carried layers: controversy, resilience, reinvention. She had worked carefully to reshape public perception over time, navigating skepticism with patience and controlled appearances. Every engagement, every speech, every gesture had been part of a longer rehabilitation narrative. And just as that narrative began to stabilize, Catherine's presence grew impossible to ignore. Not disruptive, not intentional, but powerful. Palace aides, according to quiet whispers, began noticing subtle shifts. When press coverage overwhelmingly centered on Catherine's wardrobe choices, her charitable initiatives, or her natural rapport with the public, the atmosphere reportedly changed behind closed doors. Not dramatically, not explosively, but perceptibly. Conversations about media balance surfaced more often. Briefings were scrutinized. Appearances were calibrated with increasing precision. It was no longer just about representation, it was about proportion. This is where emotional complexity enters the story. Because rivalry in the monarchy is rarely loud. It is layered. Camilla, having fought for legitimacy, could not afford irrelevance. Catherine, ascending toward a future crown, could not dim her own light. What looks like insecurity from one angle may feel like survival from another. In a hierarchy where visibility equals influence, every headline carries weight. Every comparison cuts deeper than it appears. There were moments, subtle but telling, when royal engagements seemed carefully arranged to distribute attention. Yet despite those efforts, Catherine's presence often dominated the narrative. Her speeches traveled further. Her images circulated faster. Her influence expanded quietly, but unmistakably. And in an institution built on rank and succession, that kind of organic admiration can shift internal dynamics in ways few dare to openly discuss. This tension was not personal in the way tabloids might portray it. It was structural, generational, symbolic. Catherine represented the monarchy's future. Camilla represented its hard-won present. And when those two forces coexist, friction does not require hostility. It requires only comparison. The public compared them relentlessly: style, warmth, poise, relatability. Even silence became a statement. Even restraint became strategy. So when the trainer later described repeated conversations about Catherine's stamina, posture, and public presence, those remarks did not emerge in a vacuum. They echoed against a backdrop already thick with unspoken competition. Suddenly, questions that once seemed harmless felt pointed. Curiosity felt intentional. And analysis felt strategic rather than incidental. If the monarchy thrives on balance, then imbalance becomes dangerous. And what the trainer implied suggested not admiration, but recalibration, an attempt, perhaps, to shift that delicate equilibrium without anyone noticing. Which is precisely why the next development would feel less like coincidence and more like confirmation. And then came the first strange instruction, one that would leave the trainer questioning his role inside the royal household. According to the trainer, it started subtly, an offhand comment during a workout. But it quickly escalated into something far more unusual. Camilla allegedly requested detailed observations about Princess Catherine's posture, stamina, and even wardrobe presentation during public events. This was not casual curiosity. It was specific, repeated, intentional. And the trainer began to realize he wasn't just monitoring health, he was monitoring a future queen. At first, he told himself it was harmless. In royal circles, comparison is almost instinctive. How one carries themselves, how long they stand without fatigue, how confidently they project authority, these things matter in an institution where perception is power. But the tone, he claims, slowly changed. What began as light commentary became structured inquiry. Camilla allegedly asked for breakdowns, not vague impressions, but measurable contrasts. How long does Catherine remain energized during multi-hour engagements? Does her posture shift when she greets dignitaries? Does she rehearse her composure, or does it come naturally? The trainer described feeling a tightening in his chest each time Catherine's name surfaced. Because the questions were no longer about self-improvement in isolation. They were framed comparatively. What does she do differently? How can I match that? What makes her appear so effortless? These were not rhetorical musings. They were followed by instructions. Adjust routines. Modify posture drills. Extend endurance sessions. Study footage. Analyze patterns. It felt less like personal development and more like strategic calibration. Then came what he referred to as improvement plans. The phrase sounded harmless, almost corporate. But the context, he suggests, carried competitive undertones. He was allegedly asked to design sessions aimed at refining specific qualities that Catherine was praised for: publicly grace under pressure, sustained energy, a certain composure that seemed unshakable. The trainer insists he was not told to undermine Catherine, yet the subtext lingered. If one woman's strengths become another woman's checklist, the line between admiration and rivalry grows dangerously thin. He admits he felt conflicted. Royal proximity carries its own gravity. When someone in that position makes a request, it is rarely questioned. There is loyalty to consider. Discretion. Access. And yet, as the weeks passed, he began to sense that he was being positioned as more than a wellness advisor. He was becoming an observer, a quiet analyst of another woman's public identity. That realization unsettled him. The emotional undertone shifted from curiosity to surveillance. He describes moments when he would replay conversations in his mind afterward, asking himself whether he had crossed an ethical boundary simply by listening. He was not spying. He was not instructed to confront or interfere. But he was, in his own words, gathering insight. And insight, in the wrong context, becomes leverage. What troubled him most was the timing. The alleged instructions coincided with periods when Catherine's popularity surged after major appearances, charitable initiatives, or widely praised speeches. The questions intensified following those moments. That pattern, he says, no longer felt coincidental. It felt reactive. Strategic, as though public admiration triggered private recalculation. Inside his own conscience, a battle was forming. On one side stood loyalty to the household that had trusted him. On the other stood an unease he could not silence. Because monitoring fitness is one thing. Monitoring a future queen's public strengths, repeatedly and deliberately, is another entirely. And if the purpose was truly self-betterment, why did it feel so much like preparation for something larger? He would soon discover that the comparisons were only the beginning. But what truly alarmed him was not the comparisons, it was what Camilla allegedly planned to do with that information. The trainer claims Camilla spoke of reshaping perception, a phrase that now feels chilling in hindsight. What did fitness routines have to do with public perception? Everything, apparently. Because behind the yoga mats and stretching sessions, a subtle strategy was allegedly forming, one designed to shift attention, adjust narratives, and quietly recalibrate how the monarchy's leading women were seen by the world. At first, the phrase sounded harmless, almost motivational. Reshaping perception could mean standing taller, projecting confidence, radiating vitality. But the way he recalls it, the tone was deliberate, focused. Camilla allegedly framed physical refinement not as vanity, but as positioning. In a monarchy where image sustains authority, even posture becomes political. Even stamina becomes symbolic. And suddenly, fitness was no longer about health, it was about narrative control. He describes conversations where Catherine's strengths were dissected with precision. Her calm endurance during lengthy ceremonies. Her ability to remain composed under relentless scrutiny. Her natural connection with crowds that seemed to amplify her presence without effort. Camilla allegedly wanted to understand those qualities, not in abstract admiration, but in replicable detail. How could they be mirrored? How could they be counterbalanced? How could her own appearances command equal gravity? The trainer began noticing patterns. Workout intensities allegedly increased before significant royal engagements where Catherine was also scheduled to appear. Sessions extended strategically. Emphasis was placed on posture correction, breath control, sustained energy. It felt coordinated with the calendar, as if physical preparation was being aligned with moments of potential comparison. The timing, he insists, did not feel random. Underneath it all, he sensed something more fragile, a fear that cannot be publicly acknowledged. The fear of fading influence. In institutions built on tradition, age and hierarchy are respected, but public affection follows its own rules. Catherine's popularity was organic, emotional, expansive. Camilla's position, though secured by title, still required careful maintenance in the court of public opinion. If admiration shifts, so does narrative power. That is where the competitive undertone allegedly sharpened. The trainer describes subtle remarks that hinted at urgency, statements about remaining relevant, comments about holding the room, observations about how swiftly media attention gravitates toward youth and perceived modernity. None of it overtly hostile, none of it openly resentful, but layered with awareness, with calculation. Palace aides, according to murmurs, began noticing changes in Camilla's presentation. A firmer stance, longer engagements without visible fatigue, slight adjustments in demeanor during joint appearances. Nothing dramatic enough to spark headlines, but enough for insiders to whisper about intentional refinement. Whether coincidence or strategy, the shift aligned eerily with the timeline the trainer describes. He admits the atmosphere in those sessions grew heavier. Less about improvement, more about positioning. Less about wellness, more about influence. And with every repetition of Catherine's name, the trainer felt himself slipping deeper into a dynamic he had not anticipated when he first stepped through palace gates. He was not simply guiding exercises. He was orbiting a silent rivalry that could not be spoken aloud. What unsettled him most was not the ambition itself. Ambition is human. Even within crowns and titles, it breathes quietly. What unsettled him was the underlying insecurity he sensed driving it. A need to recalibrate how the monarchy's leading women were perceived. A need to ensure that admiration remained balanced. Or redirected. And as he listened more closely, one realization began to form: if perception was being reshaped deliberately, then it would not stop at self-improvement. Because influence inside a monarchy does not expand in isolation. It shifts. It redistributes. It impacts others. And then came the moment when the trainer says he realized Princess Catherine herself might become indirectly affected. It wasn't just occasional mention. The trainer claims Princess Catherine's name surfaced in nearly every session: comparisons, questions, speculations. How long does she train? Who advises her? Does she rehearse appearances? The fixation, he says, became difficult to ignore. And the more he listened, the more he began to question whether these sessions were truly about health or about control. At first, he brushed it aside as professional curiosity. In high-profile circles, comparison is inevitable. But repetition changes meaning. When the same name echoes through private sessions again and again, it stops feeling incidental. It starts feeling intentional. He recalls how discussions would drift back to Catherine even when the session had nothing to do with public events. A stretch would lead to a question. A breath exercise would prompt speculation. A casual remark would circle back to the same subject. The pattern was steady, relentless. There was an intensity beneath the inquiries that unsettled him. Not open hostility, not overt resentment, but something sharper: a competitive pulse masked as strategy. Camilla allegedly framed her curiosity in practical terms: preparation, refinement, maintaining presence. Yet the trainer began sensing that these explanations were only the surface. Beneath them lived an unspoken awareness that Catherine's influence was expanding beyond what tradition alone could contain. Catherine's public dominance carried emotional weight. Every successful appearance, every wave of admiration, every headline praising her composure, subtly shifted the balance within the institution. That kind of momentum is powerful. It builds quietly until it becomes impossible to ignore. And inside a monarchy where hierarchy is sacred, rapid popularity can feel destabilizing. The trainer describes sensing that pressure not through anger, but through urgency. He started to feel like a silent participant in what could only be described as image warfare. No confrontations, no accusations, just strategic recalibration. Questions about wardrobe tones, observations about speaking cadence, comparisons about stamina during lengthy engagements. It was as if he were helping fine-tune a counterweight to Catherine's growing aura, and the more he participated, the heavier the responsibility felt. Inside his own mind, conflict intensified. He had entered the palace to guide health and discipline, not to orbit an invisible rivalry. Loyalty pulled him one direction. Conscience tugged him another. Each time Catherine's name surfaced, he wondered whether he was crossing a boundary simply by entertaining the discussion. Yet walking away felt impossible. Royal proximity carries pressure. Access carries obligation. And silence can feel safer than resistance. Meanwhile, tension inside the palace reportedly thickened. Subtle adjustments in scheduling. Heightened attention to media coverage. A quiet recalibration of joint appearances. Nothing dramatic enough to spark scandal, but enough to suggest that something fragile was being guarded carefully. The trainer sensed that what he was witnessing was not personal jealousy alone, but a struggle over narrative control. The fixation grew harder to rationalize. Questions became sharper. Comparisons more detailed. The emotional undercurrent less disguised. And in that tightening atmosphere, he began to understand that this was no longer about mirroring strengths. It was about positioning within a hierarchy that leaves little room for shared spotlight. He felt the weight of it, the tension between admiration and insecurity, between survival and fear of being eclipsed. And as the inquiries intensified, he sensed that the situation was approaching a threshold. Because when curiosity becomes obsession, action is rarely far behind. But it was one final instruction, a single request, that ultimately pushed him to speak out. There are moments when silence becomes complicity. The trainer claims he reached that moment during one final private session. An instruction so specific, so personal, that he felt he was being asked to cross an invisible line involving Princess Catherine's dignity. And in that instant, loyalty to the crown collided with loyalty to his conscience. He recalls the air shifting before the request was even fully spoken. The conversation had already circled back to Catherine several times that day, her endurance, her posture, her public composure. But then the tone changed. It sharpened. Camilla allegedly asked him to assess something far more intimate than stamina or strength. She wanted insight into how Catherine maintained what she called her effortless authority during prolonged scrutiny, not just physically, but psychologically. The trainer says the implication was clear. He was being asked to dissect not just movement, but identity. The alleged request went beyond observation. He claims he was encouraged to study recordings more closely, to note subtle patterns in Catherine's reactions during tense engagements, to identify moments where composure might waver. It felt invasive, not because analysis is inherently wrong, but because the purpose behind it felt different. This was not about inspiration. It was about leverage, about finding angles, about understanding another woman's strengths deeply enough to counter them. In that instant, hesitation flooded him. He describes a pause, brief but heavy. He had navigated discomfort before. He had rationalized comparison as part of the environment. But this crossed into territory that felt personal. Catherine was not present. She had not consented to being analyzed in such a manner, and the trainer suddenly felt less like a professional and more like a participant in something ethically fragile. Fear followed quickly. The palace is not an ordinary workplace. Access is privilege. Discretion is currency. Challenging a request, even subtly, carries risk. He admits his mind raced through consequences. Would refusal mean dismissal? Isolation? Quiet retaliation? The monarchy protects its image with precision, and he was painfully aware of how easily narratives can be reshaped. Instead of confrontation, he chose caution. He began quietly documenting conversations, not with the intention of immediate exposure, he says, but for protection. Dates, phrases, context. A record in case lines blurred further. The very act of writing those notes intensified the psychological weight he was carrying. Because documentation implies anticipation. Anticipation implies expectation of fallout. Sleep became difficult. Each session felt heavier than the last. What once felt like professional responsibility now felt like moral tension. He found himself analyzing not Catherine's posture, but his own integrity. How far could he go before silence made him complicit? How long could he justify staying within a system that seemed to be shifting from self-improvement to strategic maneuvering? The pressure mounted quietly. No explosive confrontation. No dramatic accusations. Just an undercurrent of something building. He sensed that the monarchy's polished surface concealed vulnerabilities far deeper than the public ever sees. And he understood that if these instructions were ever revealed, they would not be dismissed as trivial. They would be interpreted as deliberate. That realization crystallized into a decision. Not impulsive, not reckless, but inevitable. Because once conscience awakens, it rarely returns to sleep. Once the story began circulating quietly among insiders, the reaction inside the palace was swift and telling. The moment whispers turned into questions, palace corridors reportedly grew tense. Meetings were scheduled. Calls were made. The trainer's access was reviewed. And while no official statement was released, insiders claimed there was unmistakable concern about how this narrative involving Camilla and Princess Catherine might reshape public perception at a critical moment for the monarchy. What had begun as a private discomfort was now a circulating rumor, and rumors inside royal institutions move differently. They do not explode outward at first. They tighten inward. Communication channels reportedly narrowed almost overnight. Invitations shifted. Conversations that once flowed freely became guarded. The trainer's name, once a footnote in internal schedules, suddenly carried weight. Access badges were scrutinized. Appointments were reconsidered. Silence grew strategic. Camilla's alleged reaction, according to those watching closely, was measured but strained. Public composure remained intact as it always does within the monarchy, yet there were subtle signs of disruption. A firmer tone during engagements. A sharper adherence to prepared remarks. The kind of restraint that signals internal recalibration. If the claims were baseless, they still required containment. If they carried truth, they demanded control. And then there was Catherine. Her silence spoke volumes without saying a word. She continued her appearances with steady composure, neither acknowledging nor reacting publicly to the unfolding speculation. That contrast became its own narrative. Where tension seemed to swirl around one figure, the other appeared unshaken. It was not dramatic. It was not theatrical. It was quiet strength, and in the court of public opinion, quiet strength often wins. The media, sensing vulnerability, began probing cautiously. Not accusations. Not headlines. Just questions. Carefully phrased inquiries about internal dynamics. Subtle references to reported tensions. Journalists understand the monarchy's sensitivity to perception. They also understand that timing is everything, and this timing felt precarious. Public sympathy, as it often does, began drifting toward the figure perceived as composed under scrutiny. Catherine's rising admiration now carried an added layer of resilience. Meanwhile, Camilla's carefully constructed image faced renewed evaluation. Even without official confirmation, the mere suggestion of strategic comparison altered the emotional landscape. Because perception does not require proof to influence opinion, it requires possibility. Inside the institution, the stakes felt higher than the narrative itself. The monarchy survives on continuity, on unity, on the illusion of seamless hierarchy. Any hint of internal rivalry disrupts that balance. The trainer's account threatened not just reputations, but stability. And stability, once questioned, becomes fragile. What makes this moment so politically charged is not the scandal alone, but the symbolism. Two senior royal women, representing different chapters of the crown's story, now indirectly linked in a narrative of tension. Whether exaggerated or understated, the suggestion alone forced palace strategists into quiet overdrive. Because once public confidence wavers, rebuilding it is never simple. And yet, beneath the maneuvering and controlled responses, something more human lingered. Something less strategic and more emotional. The fear that admiration can shift. The fear that influence can fade. The fear that being overshadowed is not just about headlines, it is about legacy. Yet beneath the political maneuvering lies a deeper emotional truth about power, insecurity, and the fear of being overshadowed. Strip away the titles, the jewels, the ceremonies, and what remains are human emotions. Ambition, fear, survival. The trainer's claims reveal something far more intimate than strategy, a possible fear of irrelevance. As Princess Catherine rises effortlessly in global admiration, could these strange instructions have been the desperate reflex of someone fighting not for fitness but for influence? Because beneath crowns and protocol, hierarchy is still hierarchy. And in every hierarchical institution, rivalry does not need to be declared to exist. It simmers quietly in comparisons, in applause levels, in the subtle measurement of who commands the room without trying. The monarchy may be ancient, but it is not immune to the psychology of power. When admiration begins shifting toward the next generation, those who fought hard to secure their place can feel the ground move beneath them. Generational transition is rarely smooth. It carries anxiety disguised as composure. For decades, Camilla navigated scrutiny, reshaped her public image, endured skepticism, and slowly carved legitimacy into a system that does not forgive easily. That journey demanded resilience. It demanded patience. But just as stability seemed secured, Catherine's ascent accelerated. Not through force, not through rivalry, but through quiet magnetism. And that kind of ascent can feel like a mirror held up to time itself. The trainer's account suggests something deeply human beneath the calculated surface emotional fragility masked by authority. When someone has fought for years to belong, the idea of being overshadowed can strike at identity itself. It is not merely about headlines. It is about legacy, about whether history remembers you as central or transitional, about whether admiration lingers or migrates. Catherine's resilience only sharpened that contrast. She did not respond publicly. She did not engage in subtle competition. She simply continued. Appearance after appearance, initiative after initiative, she reinforced an image of stability and grace. That quiet consistency can be disarming. It requires no defense. It demands no confrontation. And in that silence, it grows stronger. Public perception, in the end, becomes the ultimate battleground. The monarchy survives because people believe in its continuity. They invest emotionally in its future. And when that emotional investment concentrates around one figure, the internal dynamics inevitably shift. The trainer's revelations, whether exaggerated or restrained, expose the tension that arises when influence begins redistributing itself without formal announcement. What makes this situation so psychologically intense is the contrast between success and suffering. Catherine's rise appears effortless from the outside, but it casts a shadow not intentionally, but inevitably. Camilla's authority, though secured by title, still competes with perception. And perception cannot be commanded. It must be earned again and again. If the alleged instructions were indeed rooted in fear of fading relevance, then they reveal something tragic rather than villainous. A struggle to maintain footing in an institution where time moves forward relentlessly. A desperate attempt to recalibrate influence before it slips further away. And yet, desperation, even subtle, carries consequences. Because once insecurity shapes strategy, the ripple effects extend beyond private sessions. They influence decisions. They alter tone. They reshape relationships. And in a monarchy watched by millions, even the smallest recalibration becomes magnified. The trainer's voice did more than expose private conversations. It peeled back the emotional architecture beneath royal polish. It forced the public to confront an uncomfortable truth: power is not static. It is negotiated constantly, even within crowns. And now, as the trainer's voice echoes beyond palace walls, the question is no longer whether this happened but what it means for the monarchy's future. One confession. One voice from inside the palace. And suddenly the monarchy feels less invincible than ever. Camilla's alleged instructions have exposed not just a personal rivalry, but a vulnerability at the heart of royal power. Because when those closest to the crown begin to speak out, it forces the world to question what else remains hidden. The long-term implications stretch far beyond a single training session or a handful of private conversations. Royal authority survives on perception, on the belief that unity is unshakable and hierarchy is harmonious. Once cracks appear, even faint ones, they invite scrutiny. And scrutiny, once awakened, rarely retreats quietly. The trainer's revelations have introduced doubt into a structure built on confidence. Not loud doubt. Not explosive scandal. But something more dangerous: lingering uncertainty. Public loyalty is a delicate force. It shifts gradually, almost invisibly, until suddenly it has moved. Catherine's steady composure throughout the unfolding tension has only strengthened her image. She did not defend herself. She did not retaliate. She remained consistent. And in moments of controversy, consistency becomes powerful currency. As sympathy subtly gravitates toward her, the emotional balance of the monarchy begins tilting in ways that cannot be formally acknowledged but are deeply felt. Camilla's position, once stabilized after years of careful rehabilitation, now faces renewed examination. Not condemnation, not outright rebellion, but heightened awareness. Every appearance is analyzed more closely, every gesture interpreted through the lens of recent claims. The very effort to reshape perception may have reshaped it in an unintended direction. And that irony carries its own weight. Meanwhile, the trainer's future hangs in uncertainty. Speaking out has granted him a voice, but it may have cost him proximity to power. Whistleblowers within institutions rarely emerge untouched. He may be portrayed as courageous by some, disloyal by others. Yet his testimony has already altered the conversation. He has forced the monarchy into a defensive posture without a single official rebuttal. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than denial. The palace has not issued explosive counterstatements. It has not engaged in dramatic rebuttals. Instead, it has chosen restraint. Strategic quiet. But strategic quiet can be interpreted in many ways. To some it signals dignity, to others it suggests containment. And in the absence of clarity, narratives multiply. The public fills gaps with speculation, and speculation is fertile ground for lasting impact. At its core, this story is not about exercise routines or posture corrections. It is about fragility within power, about how quickly admiration can redistribute itself, about how influence, once assumed secure, must constantly be reinforced. When perception shifts, even slightly, the ripple travels through corridors of authority. The monarchy will endure. Institutions built over centuries do not collapse over whispers. But whispers matter. They accumulate. They alter tone. They shape legacy. And what began as a private unease inside a training session has evolved into a broader meditation on hierarchy, insecurity, and the relentless passage of generational change. The emotional tension remains unresolved. No dramatic confrontation. No public confession from within the palace. Just an altered atmosphere. A recalibrated balance. A lingering question about what happens when the people closest to the crown decide to speak. And as the monarchy moves forward, one truth lingers: sometimes the most revealing battles are not fought in public ceremonies, but whispered quietly behind closed doors. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.